Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I am the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today, we have Cheryl Poe, who is the founder and owner of Advocating for Kids, Inc., a special education advocacy organization that provides resources, information, and workshops to parents and professionals with a special focus on addressing needs of Black and Brown children and those from the lower socioeconomic status. She is also a founding member and board president of the National Allies for Parents in Special Education, a national parent-driven organization that works hard to increase access and quality advocacy resources for special education families from underserved populations to improve educational outcomes. Ms. Poe holds a Master's of Arts degree in Urban Education and Counseling and has work experience that includes over 14 years of working with children with various disabilities and their families. Ms. Poe is a mother of 2 boys with learning disabilities and prides herself on understanding the struggles that parents face when dealing with special education issues. Ms. Poe is diagnosed with ADHD and learning disabilities and received special education services as a child herself. I'm really excited about having Cheryl on the show today. We have a very candid conversation around being Black and work and doing advocacy work and what that looks like and the systems we have to overcome. She also talks about how she's been in the business for a long time and how much hasn't changed from her start to where we are now. So I hope you all enjoy today's show. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. Today we have a very special guest, someone I look up to myself for all the work that she does in the community. Today we have Cheryl Poe. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm super excited to be here today with you and to have this important conversation.
Yes, very important. And, let's get right into it. I've already read your bio, but can you go ahead and tell us more about yourself and what you do?
Advocating for Kids, which is the nonprofit that I founded and work at and president of everything that happens there. It came about because I identified that there was a need for people that look like me to have access to someone who would be willing to pair with them in order to understand how to get through the special education process, because it's hard. There aren't a lot of African American or Black American, which is what I prefer to be called. For the record, I prefer Black American. But there aren't a lot of, when I first needed an advocate, I could not find anyone that would understand the pain that I felt. And what had happened was I was, traumatized by a white speech pathologist who wanted to minimize my son, his need for speech pathology, to me speaking Black to him at home, and then me getting very offended and so glad the Jersey didn't all the way come out of me, so I didn't jump across the table and all that good stuff, even though I wanted to.
Yeah.
Because that was such an insult. It was it was an overt stain and an overt cruelness about attaching my race to my son's disability. And I felt, and I pressed her. I asked her, I was like, what do you mean by Black English? And she continues to say, well, that's how Black people talk when they're on a break outside smoking or by a water cooler.
Wow.
Yeah. And wow, exactly. So I remember, to this day, I actually remember the outfit I had on. when this happened in this room with this white woman who I'm trying not to hurt, so I don't go to jail. But and I remember taking a deep breath and just saying to her, please don't say that. I find that offensive. Mm-hmm. And her response being, well, the district says I'm allowed, Virginia Beach Public Schools says I'm allowed to use that term. So I'm just saying that's what it is. And I said, but I'm telling you, I find it offensive. And then I even went to her and I was like, well, so you're also saying, because my husband's white, so you're saying when we're at home, what, he can't understand me either?
Yeah.
And she just kind of looked at me, turned extremely red, because I'm a dark-skinned woman. She should have known he was mixed, right? Like, it's not like it was a secret. I was like, whatever. And I remember her just turning awfully red when I said that and becoming offended. Like she got offended. It was so I got up out of there and I came home and Maria, I'm not gonna lie. I am, I guess it's just my nature to kind of fight and stand up for things that are wrong. But, for this one, it took me a while to process it because mm-hmm. I think one of the things I want to share with the audience, and we can talk about it a little bit later, is that I am an adult with a disability. I was a child who grew up with an IEP. I used to stutter, my mom will tell you. I continue to struggle with a specific learning disability and some other things. And we can talk about that later. But it was the idea that that this had happened to me, and again, I am a Northerner still. At this point in my stage of living here in Virginia, I have thoughts I'm going back to Jersey, right? So that Southern kind of blatant racism, it took a while to hit me in the face, and when it did, it hurt. I'm not gonna lie, I was more hurt than I was angry. I was just like, all that, don't want to say a bad word, but all that stuff that you carry around all your life about, that, like I was talking to you before, the idea of, I did the right things. I got a degree, even though I had a disability, and it was hard. I got a master's degree. I did well there because I found my niche, right? Which was, and it's so funny, which was counseling, right? But also an urban education. And then going to post-grad school and at the time I was literally getting supervision for my LPC hours from a director of guidance counseling for one of the school districts, Chesapeake Public School Districts, Dr. Rowe, never forget her. And this was happening to me, right? It's like, this idea of, and I'm older than you. I'm going to tell you, I'm a product of, I was born in the later, I'm not going to say later 60s. Yeah. Okay. I was born, I'm a product of maybe the 80s, you might want to say, from a perspective of like that, I think is where my disability became really in high school. Like I could see it, taste it, feel it, understand it differently. And eventually my senior year, because I was aware of what it was and I learned some really good tools, I didn't have an IEP. I was actually able to get off of it. But as I was saying, it's the pain and the trauma caused by that to this date is what has driven me and what continues to drive me, right? Mm-hmm. It almost feels like God was like, yeah, you think you're going to go on this path because, my undergrad was in therapeutic recreation, which is where, you provide, like when I've worked in psychiatric centers, residential centers for kids with various kinds of issues, from sex offenders to severe ED to, you name it, DDs, ID, and providing them with opportunities to engage in recreational, fun, social activities. And then my master's was in urban education and counseling, right? And I was going to get the advanced degree in counseling to be able to sit for the LPC. And then God was like, hey, guess what? No, that's not what you're going to do. You're going to become an advocate. And I think he placed, right? And I don't understand why it happened, but I think now, being at the stage at where I am in my life now, I do know why it happened, because I'm here where I need to be. And I can embrace that now, where before it felt like, and up until I'd say 2 years after my kids graduated the high school in the districts, because at one point I was like, hey, I don't have to be an advocate anymore because my kids are done. Right, they're out of there. And I sat with that, and then I think when I continued to experience and unpeel layers of myself around special education advocacy from a perspective of, healing my own personal wounds as a child, right? Of being a person of color, receiving special education services back in the day when, it wasn't what it is now. And so I went through that stage of who I am and what I do. And now I'm at this strange stage. And I think a lot of it has to do with the lockdown, the virus, the change, and most definitely a more inclusive pushing of addressing racism in our systems. I feel like I'm here now because I have a lot to give, so that parents and people who look like me can have a voice, so that the systems that oppress us, that there's somebody that's always going to speak to it, whether it's trending or not. And then I've been meeting, just like you and I, with that knowledge, I've been meeting some amazing other, and I'll say younger, because you are younger than me. I probably advocates, Black professional people, meeting Black professionals that are now entering into the disability community is exciting. And anything I can do to foster that, to provide mentorship, to partner with, having you on our board at the National Allies of Parents in Special Education is extremely exciting to me. And I know you're going to bring so much to the mission, based on our views about what needs to be done to help our families.
Yeah, it's so, I want to say funny, but it's really not funny. The fact that it was a healthcare provider that just blatantly did not understand being culturally responsive to Black parents and their children, that led us to start organizations for parents like us.
Wow.
The fact that
that's kind of powerful. Yeah, I never thought of it like that, but you're right.
It is, because it's such a lack of culturally responsiveness being taught in these higher education platforms. As somebody who, got their master's in mental health counseling, as somebody who was, in a PhD program and, went all through all of the coursework, there's no classes that literally sit you down and have you learn how to be culturally responsive to a family. They don't take you through that. So when you learned your applications about what you're going to do, and you go into the homes and you're trying to apply these interventions, and then in my case, when it didn't work, because of cultural aspects, it was, you're resistant, you're an aggressive Black mom, you're this, you're that. When it really was, you don't know how to work with me because I'm Black. You don't know what to not say to me, like you speak Black.
Right, exactly.
Offended me. And guess what? Those who don't have the resources like we have and had at the time, how are they being treated? That was my thought. How are they being treated? And that led me to start my organization, much like you. It's so sad that this is constantly occurring for Black parents.
And for me, like I said, this is amazing. It feels like I'm looking, when I hear you speak about your experiences and the way that you view it, I swear it's like a mirror. Because I was working as an in-home clinician at the time, and I literally said to my husband, I said, hey, can we afford for me to drop this? I mean, and I was working, in an in-home clinic clinician jobs, because you know, also those free supervision hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying to him, can we afford for me not to do that right now and really focus on learning as much as I can about special education? Because not only am I going to need it for my son, but if this is happening to me, can you imagine what it is like for a Black person or even a brown person who does not have any education, that maybe they were like me, that they were maybe on an IEP, but they didn't get the services I got, so that they didn't have the same outcomes that I have. I mean, it still blows my mind, because I have a case now called the Chesapeake Six, which is about 6 students, Black male students, and we're talking free lunch, right? So really struggling incomes, and the teacher that received them after they had already suffered some trauma by the hands of the school district, was a whistleblower, African American, dope teacher. And she realized that what the district had done was wrong. She was looking at these IEPs and she's like, wait a minute, I can't write an IEP. This data is when this kid was in 3rd grade. You know, he's a rising 6th grader, or some of them didn't have evaluations at all. And then she's looking at their placement. Some of them, I'd say all but one, was supposed to be in an inclusion special education class. But when she came, they opened a self-contained special education class and segregated and dumped these kids all into that class. And then when the administrator and the principal tried to put pressure on her to falsify, I mean, they wanted her to falsify these kids' IEPs and then get the parents to agree to sign the IEP, when she refused to do that, and when she refused to do some other, and then put in documentation why she's not doing it, and what the staff said to her, man, the community here came around to support her, because they fired her. And they fired her saying that the email that she put out when she summarized to the Virginia Department of Education, on this meeting, Mr. Dr. Schultz and blah, blah, name the people, asked me to write IEPs, even though they knew the data. I mean, she bulleted each thing that they asked her to do and sent it to the VDOE. And they fired her under the guise of, she embarrassed them. They literally said, you're being, let go. We're going to give you the opportunity to resign, or you are fired. And if we fire you, you will not get job. You will be blackballed in the Hampton Roads area getting a job. So she resigned her position and said in there, I'm resigning my position because you told me if I didn't, I'd be blackballed and wouldn't be able to get a job in the area. If it weren't for her, these kids that we now have, and they are that population, Maria, that you asked about initially, the ones that don't have parents that have any of the skills, resources, or privilege you and I have to advocate for their kids. And we've gotten a wonderful group of Black advocates and educators in the Hampton Roads area that are just giving love and blessings to these kids, because, and we are, as a unit, coming together as a community to say to Chesapeake Public Schools, we're watching you, and what you just did was just wrong. It was wrong. It's wrong. It was nasty wrong. We told you it was wrong. Instead of trying to fix it up, you tried to cover it up. They gave us, a Black gatekeeper. You know what I mean when I say that, right, Maria?
Yes.
Okay. For the audience,
for the audience,
do you want to elaborate on it, or do you?
I will.
Okay, you do. You tell them what I mean when I say Black gatekeeper.
Black gatekeeper would be their token Black person to come and try to talk to the advocate or the parent, in the sense that, I'm sending somebody who looks like you to talk to you to calm you down, so that way you don't do anything that's harmful. So it's kind of that person that, I'm going to send a Black person just because they're Black, to talk to you,
Mhm.
so then you'll be okay with what we're saying.
Exactly. Yes. And they sent us one who, geez, I ate him up and spit him out. I don't know how many times. But the bad part about it, the parents had all done that before me because I came into this case late. Like, the whistleblower teacher, who you should really do a podcast with one day. She's amazing. But the whistleblower teacher, she, had done a lot of work, and her mother, who is an advocate, and she and I worked together as clinicians in the past. So she did as much as she could, and she couldn't believe, things like suspending kids for more than 10 days, but then refusing to have manifestation determination meetings because they said it wasn't a pattern of behavior. Just crazy stuff. And she reached out to me, and then I'm like, no, there's just no way. Like, some of the things that she was saying to me, I was like, there's just, they can't be that obvious. It's just too bad to believe that it happened. But then I was able to meet with, again, like I said, a group of amazing African-American educators and advocates in the Tidewater area, along with a couple representatives from one of the congressional offices, just, there to hear the concerns. And it was worse. It was worse than we thought, because we had access to the paperwork. And Maria, there were like IEPs that had freaking, like, the plop if it had more than 10 sentences overall.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. No, like, how important evaluations are.
Yeah.
No evaluations had been done on these kids. Some of them never. Others, like, since forever. They were being suspended. So the district thought they were being slick. So what they would do is they would suspend them over the time that they're supposed to, call it a short term, say that they had a meeting and determined that it wasn't of similar behavior, or it wasn't a pattern of behavior. So because they determined that without the parents' input, that there was no need for a manifestation determination meeting. So these kids are racking up out of school suspensions where their rights to even a due process all were being denied. By the time the parents, and some of the parents were hard, but life is what it is. You have to be able to relate that not everybody lives in a white picket house. Not everybody can get a good job. Yes, people do have issues that cause them to make some bad choices, and they have to pay those consequences. But when they come to you about their children and they are asking you, and they said this to this one Black gatekeeper, one of the dads was like, yo, man, these are my kids, and you're just messing up. I know all these suspensions aren't right. What are you doing to help them? And when the gatekeeper says, oh, I'm just doing what I'm told to do, and allows, right, that to allow these kids to fall through the cracks when, oh God, I'm sorry. To say it's okay to treat these kids less than because you're just doing what you're told to do? Brother, how do you sleep with yourself at night? How? Look, and I did ask that at an IEP meeting, and he muted the parent. I know, right? Who does that? You're at an IEP meeting.
Yeah, this is the
Yes.
issue. And I know you specifically focus on minorities and lower lower socioeconomic status families. Can you explain to us, because as you and I know, we know this, but why is it different for Black parents? Why is navigating the school system so much more different for Black parents?
Because we're Black.
It's straight to the point.
But if you want me to elaborate,
because there are a lot of listeners who don't understand what being Black means
in America.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So let's break this down. Institutional racism is real, and institutional racism is the idea that there are systems that are developed, that they are structured, that they are purposely designed and delivered with a racist lens, right? So it is the idea that the school to prison pipeline isn't a phenomena. It is something that the system developed that was racist against students with disabilities, I'm sorry, it was discriminatory against students with disabilities. It is even more discriminatory if you got a student with a disability that's Black, and if you're Black or brown, you are at a greater risk of being referred to systems, the criminal systems, versus structures for whites where the request of where I doubt you would hear your child's not getting speech therapy services because you speak Black English to them at home. That's just not going to happen to a white person. It's not, right?
No.
So so that's my best example of saying why it's different. And then we got to talk about our own folk, right? Our own people. We got stigmas on top of stigmas on top of stigmas in the Black community.
Yeah.
Even people, professionals, even to this day we have celebrities like Steve Harvey getting in trouble for just the old school joking, like, oh, how you have that uncle that's not right. Like, that's what he would say, like, not right. That uncle that's over there drooling or slobbering, that those kinds of statements degrade the idea that uncle had a disability called developmental delays. And if we accepted that, instead of calling that uncle over there and got him some services, maybe he wouldn't be drooling on himself. Maybe he would be up doing the electric slide with us too. Because like I said, I'm older.
And you know what it is in that one, that leads to us not wanting any kind of diagnosis, but also it's because those resources don't get into our community. So, it was uncle is not quite right because we didn't have the resources or the means or the know-how to get uncle tested and evaluated, to know exactly what diagnosis uncle had. So we just, went with it a lot of times, and we still have that mentality of it, and we use it as a joke, but we don't understand the impact it has on other people. I know I was talking to a friend and we were talking about something, and he was like, oh, it would be the comparison to it being somebody in sped ed. And I was like, my child is in special education. How would you think that made her feel to hear you use it in a derogatory term? I don't think people realize the ableism behind the comments that they use and how impactful and hurtful it is, because we use it so much as in a joking manner. We may not mean any harm, but it is in fact very harmful.
Right. It is. I am one of those people that survived through, growing up, and being born, in the late 60s, and growing up and having a disability, it was still very hotbed around civil rights issues during my formative years, if you think about it, right? And then my family we were privileged. I'm not gonna, lie. We were, I didn't realize, I will admit though, I didn't realize how privileged I was until I left where I was from. I will admit that. But it was that idea of, oh my God, oh, Cheryl can't read, because I went to a school that was predominantly white, and I will guarantee you that a majority of the Black males that attended my school, or Black people altogether, were first cousins, because my family lived in the town. We were pretty much and our family members lived there, so we were the only ones. So the idea of being from the family, right, and having a disability and being Black, the shame that came with that at times, is still, again, I can still feel that, I still carry that some. And it's hilarious. I had not hilarious. It's wow, gosh, we're getting deep, aren't we, Maria? I was going to tell you about a growth moment around that, like the stigma. Like I said, I had a disability. I was not reading, and I remember to this day being in Baker Elementary School, and I was going through the lunch line to get my food, and a black kid, not a relative, but somebody who was very close to my family, had saw me, because they would pull us out and put us put us behind a bookcase for services, and he was like, "Oh, I saw you. You can't read. You're over there with those special kids. No, teasing me, right?" And just remember not knowing what to do, and I think I turned around and just yelled or something, and he kind of went away. I was I've had quite a few deaths. So one of my aunts, my last aunt that's on my dad's side, died at the funeral. I had to read, and I went back to Morristown, New Jersey, right? The funeral was my hometown. And the person that was behind me in that line was in the audience. And I remember this sense of, look at me now, right? From, like, look at me now. It was, I don't know, it was like, it kind of let go some of the trauma associated with what I had experienced within the Black community, right?
Yeah.
So that was a powerful thing for me, and I, for me, that was healing. And I think that, when you ask, what is it different? Why is it different for Black people in sped ed? That's another example, right? I know our community. I know what our folk can do to each other.
It is. And on the other end of that, I have a disability as well. I have ADHD. But I was diagnosed as an adult.
Okay.
So I would be what is considered 2E now, twice exceptional. And because my IQ was so high in school, I went under the radar and went undiagnosed because my grades were still, at a point where nobody was concerned. But it was difficult. My executive functioning skills were quite honestly just trash, and still trash. I don't know how I graduated college. I really don't, because I just had no type of executive functioning skills. And then when getting diagnosed, and I was most recently diagnosed, like we're talking a couple years.
Oh, wow. Well,
yeah.
welcome.
Yeah, but
welcome to the
knew,
club.
once I got my master's, I knew, and I was just like, does it matter to get, I went through the whole thing of, does it matter to get the diagnosis
yes.
this age and this, and once I did get the official diagnosis, I felt so validated.
Yes, of course. Yes.
How I operate, and I think that happens a lot in our community, is that we go undiagnosed, and it's so hard for us to meet major milestones because we're undiagnosed, and people don't understand why we have the behaviors that we do, and just having that validation of, okay, yeah, this is why executive functioning skills are trash.
And I love that story, because again, you are like my mirror, because they got my specific learning disability, like my reading and my writing, but they missed my ADHD when I was growing up. But they discovered that for me in college. That's where I found that out. And just I had this, I'll tell you this funny story around it. It was, I'd gotten in trouble in college. Like, who goes to college and gets kicked out of a class? Me, right? And it was because, it was, I had to take an anatomy, physiology class. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to survive this stuff. I wasn't really paying attention until she said this, and she was making a scenario of any part of the body that is open to air, any hole, any orifice that's open to air has mucus around it. And it caught my attention, and I blurted out without thinking, Maria, does that include your vagina? And I was like horrified. The look on her face was like, whatever. And for me, I wasn't trying to be funny. It was like, oh, I was like making some connections out loud, I guess. I don't know. And I literally got kicked out of class. And when I went to tell, went through the processes, and I just kind of explained what had happened, again, they're like, hey, have you ever been tested for ADHD? Because, you're describing some other things that other than your SLD. And that's when I found out too, about the ADHD. But it was, again, when I talk about this out loud, again, it's that trauma of being misunderstood.
Yes.
Right? So you're like, oh God, and I was the only Black in the class too. So, you're like, oh, that Black girl's being nasty, right? Or she's being sexual. And no, I was just being ADHD and blurting out what I thought.
Yeah.
And making a connection in the best way that how my mind worked, whatever that meant, right?
Yeah.
I bet y'all never forget that lesson ever.
But that's what we have to deal with, because
Yes.
Navigating this process of sped ed, not having the resources, having to figure things out, and knowing that our children are still, while we're fighting for them, having to navigate school with their disability, with their diagnosis, and how they're being treated within the school system, one, just because they're Black, before they even look at the diagnosis, and then adding the diagnosis on top of that and having to navigate that is just so different for us. It really is. And it can be quite traumatic, and I want to move on to, Black parents specifically, because when navigating the school system, with it being so different for us, as we've talked about, what do Black parents need to know when navigating the school system?
Okay, and this is my specialty, right? It's the idea of making sure that I see all the kinds of things that Black parents aren't offered at IEP meetings, or how things and resources are left out in telling parents about it. So one of the biggest things that any parent, and they will tell you this, any parent needs to do, is to understand your rights and have either the support behind you to be willing to fight for those rights, or learn how to do it yourself. Because you can be clearly my example of what happened with me. So I can get, I had to fight to get the the speech and language related services. But even after I got them, I had to fight because the lady was a racist. Yeah. Right? So, not only do parents have to know how to fight to get access to occupational therapy, and know that occupational therapy helps with kids on the spectrum because it includes sensory needs. It's not just limited to a child's ability to write or hold a pen. That it can also include daily living skills. If your child's young or slow in potty training, that a toileting plan can be developed in coordination with an occupational therapist, right? Those are kinds of detailed information that parents need to be able to navigate. But then on top of that, if they're Black, they have to also understand that school districts are going to fight them more because they don't expect you to have that kind of information. Those are services that I see on white IEPs even before I even come on the case sometimes, right? So it's the idea that if these, it's knowing what to ask, but then having that strength or support to fight for what you ask, because they're going to be surprised that you are requesting such, and they are going to give you misinformation about why you can't have it.
Yes.
So you have to know the truth. You have to know your rights. You have to know that a related service can include things like social work services. So if you are a parent that's struggling, if you are a single Black mother who maybe just needs a little extra support, that social worker can be working with her to identify maybe some community resources for the kiddo with the disability. That could help with perhaps childcare, or hooking them up with services like you, Maria, or other community services that child could access, so that makes, it's looking at the whole child. So when the child is being well taken care of at home, they come to school, they're more prepared. How about counseling? Sometimes our children need counseling, meaning that they need somebody that they trust, that they can sit down with and develop a therapeutic relationship to address issues that are getting in the way of learning at school. Yeah. So related services could be counseling. It could be with a school psychologist. It could be with a qualified individual. The IDA does not identify what they mean. all the kinds of services that are allowed under related services. There's something on there I've never been able to get. And the funny part is, I used to be a recreational therapist. I worked in a job called a therapeutic recreational therapist for the city of Virginia Beach. That used to be my job. But I've never, ever been able to get therapeutic recreational services on an IEP. Never. I've never been able to how to figure that out. But believe it or not, I have heard of some parents through other advocates, because we do a lot of national work where they have been able to get those kinds of things. But I bet you hardly any parents know that is something that's actually listed in the law as a source. Parent training, especially with the COVID going on. I know with a lot of my clients, I am putting, especially my little guys, some of the kindergartners, first graders, second graders, and they're going back to school. And I reached out to you for some help with this, but developing some social stories about racism for them so that they can understand what is going on, how to recognize it, and what to do, and making sure there are resources in the school. That then holds the school accountable for, okay, look, we're teaching this kiddo about racism, and meaning if a kid calls him the N-word, or if a kid does say something out of color, that the school has to take action on that. But not an action of just punishing. They need an action of healing. Yeah. Right? That baby who experienced that, if they're young, they need some healing because it's traumatic. And being sensitive enough to know how to handle that and approach the child. I think for our kids with disabilities that are Black, we need to be writing that into some of their IEPs. So that's just, how we have to be creative when making sure that you're advocating for a Black kid with a disability in a system that does not like Black people in the first place, right? Who must, when I think about this conversation, who I would love to be able to meet and talk to one day, just sit down and have a cup of hot tea with her, is Ruby, what is it? Ruby, oh my goodness, Bridges, right? Bridges, yeah. And for those who don't know who she is that little girl that you will see everywhere and she was a dark-skinned girl too, as far as the colorism. She wasn't the one that kind of blends in. I mean, she was a dark-skinned Black little girl who was ushered by white National Guard because the white people were spitting at her, throwing food at her, calling her names as she tried to enter a school for learning. Yeah. Right? Imagine the trauma that little girl must have faced all of her life. And I guarantee you, nobody at that time even thought about addressing it. One of the big things that school districts, and this goes to the idea where you were talking about the gatekeepers, the microaggressions that they themselves participate in, right?
I'm quite sick of it. I was just talking about this today. Black parents can't win for losing. If we speak up, if we advocate, we're seen as aggressive. We're seen, especially Black women, aggressive. Oh my God, here she comes. I don't want to talk to her. Then on the other end, if we don't say anything, if we don't, advocate as they see fit for us to do, then we're seen as, oh, you don't care. You're not involved. We can't win for losing in a situation.
Yes, exactly. You're right. You're spot on. And that's why I think that the development of the Black Advocacy Collective is so important.
Yes, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Black Advocacy Collective file form.
Yes. So, like I said, I'm considered an old head, I think, in the special education advocacy community. I've been on the board of the Council of COPA, the Council of Parents, Advocates, and Attorneys, and I say that because they are known and they do great work. I mean, as far as putting out information that can be used they do great jobs, and they will follow class actions. I mean, they have that ability to. And within going there, like, that's where I got my start. I have to be honest. That's part of the process that I went through in becoming who I am now. I was a member of COPA. I was very, ran into some amazing people that were doing the work in other states and developed those relationships. I was on the board of COPA, and one of the biggest issues were the lack of racial diversity, and not only the lack of racial diversity, but actually, I don't know if you ever been to a COPA conference, but you'll have about 500 people in three. I think we counted them. Me and David Jefferson. He's currently on the board. Sorry, David. When we were at the conference, COPA's conference in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, the chocolate. I mean, we had about 500 attendees, and me and David walked around, and I think we saw maybe 8 Black people.
Oh, wow.
Including ourselves. And that doesn't include my family, because, like I said, I'm from that area, who I invited to come over for cocktails and stuff later. So with that being true, you can imagine that there wasn't a lot of space for my voice. So I left, and well, I did. Me and Gloria, we did get the social. We were, part of the original people to develop the social. And I got so off track. Oh my goodness. But anyway, the social cultural piece, we were able to develop some stuff around that for COPA, which was a nice thing, and it stayed. However, the contacts, the Black advocates that I met through COPA, and then me pretty much leaving, and then other Black advocates and people like yourself that were starting to come out, and attended an event that NAPSI actually kind of did. When we did that 50-state town hall, that was the first time we had that many Black special education advocates or special education attorneys or special education representatives at all participating in a disability community organizational event. And from that, I said, oh my goodness, I'm not going to lose this. So I reached out to everyone, and the queens, as I call them, and we decided to kind of come together because we need a space to support each other. We need a space to have kind of the conversation, right, Maria, that you and I are having now, and know that it's about us having, being able to say you're not alone. Your experiences aren't just you. A great way to fight off and get rid of those microaggressions we hear about being too aggressive and all of that good stuff. So that's the Black collective. The Black Advocacy Collective is a group of wonderfully talented Black American women that are in the special education community and that are doing the work. And if I'm correct, aren't you interviewing me and Cynthia?
Yes, it'll be soon.
Yeah, I'm actually excited about that. It's going to be a first, because we were doing this. Me and Cynthia were going through Daniels Hall. We were trying to think of who, who was the first Black American to join or be a part of NAPSI or the disability community, as far as being very active and vocal. And we came up with each other. We couldn't think of anybody else that came before us that have been able to find space for our voices. Until back then, until us, and so interviewing you, when you interview us for the Black Advocacy Collective, it'll be really neat to kind of go down that memory lane and kind of talk about what we've learned.
Yeah, and it's so important for the Black Advocacy Collection because people don't understand what it's like for Black professionals on the other end. Black parents and Black students. It's also that for Black professionals. We experience a lot of that racism as well, in just trying to do our job and not having people who understand, one, that we're getting looked at as somebody who was Black before all of the credentials and letters behind our name.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're right. That is definitely we need that, because we don't have it. I mean, small groups and pods of us have been doing it, but to make it in an official space is exciting.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it's going to be a lot to come. So be on the lookout. So as we wrap up, any resources, advice, tips for parents and caregivers?
Yeah, definitely understand your regulations in your particular state, and go to your state ed and be active. Be a part of any kind of committees or special education advisory boards that they may have, both on the state level and local level. Make sure that there's space for our children in the special education community. If you are a part of an organization already that's predominantly white, make sure you are helping them, assisting them in covering the issues that would be relevant to Black and Brown students also. As far as taking care of as far as ensuring that your child is receiving access to FAPE, again, create a network. Learn as much as you can from events like this. I know that I'm going to do a shameless plug. NAPSE, the National Allies for Parents in Special Education, Maria is one of our newest board members. We are so lucky to have her. We are so excited. And I'm the president of it. So one of the things, parents and caregivers, we are going to be doing a virtual conference. And I'm telling you, that conference is going to be dope. You are going to be able to learn more in depth about what institutional racism is and how it looks. You're going to learn specific tips. You're going to walk away with things that you can, like action, like with verbs, right? You're going to have action things that you can do to ensure that your children are respected and educated equally to those that are white.
Where can listeners find you?
They can go to my website at A as in Apple, D as in David, V as in Victor. It's the number 4, kidsinc.org. And if you go to that webpage, you can, it does need some updating, but definitely you can go to the Contact Us form tab, and you can fill out information and, share with me what some of your concerns are, and I can make an appointment with you to either do a coaching session, which is just to kind of talk out what you're experiencing and seeing what we can do to help, or you could hire me to be your special education advocate. Also, please check out my Advocating for Kids Facebook page. I do a lot of great interviews there. In fact, Miss Maria is going to be my hopefully very soon one of my next guest speakers, but I try and have speakers that talk about an array of things. Attorneys come on there sometimes and talk about what their experiences are. Parents who have, I call them my parent warriors, the parents that are doing the work and being that parent, speak. So there's lots of different kinds of information that you can learn from our Facebook page. Perfect. And then, of course, my email address, which is adv4kids, again, the number 4 kids, @gmail.com.
Perfect. And we'll have all of that information in the show notes for all of you. So thank you for being on the podcast and dropping so much knowledge and going deep and sharing your experiences, because that is such great information and valid information for people to learn from and see that we haven't really done much as in progress, since you being a youth, and that's a sad thing. So thank you for sharing. And also thank you all for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode of the podcast. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autismandblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.